Just before we get into this episode, there's a trigger warning as we talk about some sensitive subjects that might upset listeners. Hi Chris, welcome to Gift of the Gab. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I'm Chris. I hate these.
I know it's the worst.
My mind just goes everywhere.
I feel bad asking people because they're like, "What did I say? What's interesting?" How old are you?
I'm 29.
What's your occupation?
Right now I'm a freelancer, so I do basically marketing, social media content creation for bars and restaurants, and basically like make Instagram reels and try and make places look cool. Yeah.
Fair. And you grew up in London and moved here?
Yeah, I was born in London. I lived there till I was 3, so I for all intents and purposes, I feel Scottish. Like I've lived here. I've lived in Edinburgh my whole life, pretty much my whole life, and this like it's very much part of my identity to be Scottish.
Yeah, proud to be Scottish.
Proud to be Scottish. Yeah.
So, were your parents Scottish?
Yeah, no. So my mum was from the Isle of Skye, so she's a proper Highlander, and my dad. He still lives in London, but he's from the Ivory Coast, which is on the west coast of Africa.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And so what brought you up to Edinburgh?
Good question. So really, I think it was when I was really young. My mum and I, we lived in quite a poor part of London. So my mum's white. Like obviously, there's not many black people from the Isle of Skye, but there were a lot of kind of gangs and stuff around. We lived in Streatham, and I think it was quite important to her to basically get me away from that environment
to protect you
as early as possible, because she did some at the time she was doing a bit of care work and stuff for local people in the community, and she saw a lot of young people end up involved with gangs, victim of gangs.
That must have scared her.
I think so. Yeah. It's London's a very different world from little villages.
She picked the right place to come to. Edinburgh's so tame.
So yeah, I think she just thought, you know what, like a young, particularly like a black kid growing up in London, it's very easy to get sucked into that lifestyle. So yeah, we came to Edinburgh.
How was it growing up as a young black kid in Edinburgh?
Weird. I wasn't even that aware of it for a lot of my life. Not until I got more older and more kind of socially aware. But I was the only black kid in my school. So I went to George Heriot's, which is like a private school, posh as hell. I was like I stood out like a sore thumb. I had a massive afro at the time, which. Just side note, they didn't allow because
they didn't allow you to have an afro.
So guys weren't allowed hair that went past their collar. Some sort of archaic rule that they've.
I had that in my school as well.
Right.
I went to a private school, yeah.
And but I had an afro, so my hair didn't go above my beyond my collar. But they made a new rule for me, basically being like, okay, you now can't have hair that goes past your collar, and you can't have afros.
They made a new rule just for you, to single you out.
Yeah. And like, yeah, it was a whole big drama for a while. People made like petitions and stuff saying that it was like cultural, this was part of my culture. And
oh, your school was kind of woke back then.
I know. But I think we found a sort of compromise in the end where basically they were like, you can have like a small afro. But
just tone it down.
Yeah, it was a bit wild for a while. I was like this, I'm quite tall now, but I was like the shortest guy in my year at the time, and my hair was like
crazy.
A good third of my height. They were like, look, just make it a bit neater and we'll let you off. But then any new students that come in, so when I was in my 6th year, this new one other black kid joined in first year, and he had an afro on day 1, and on day 2 it was completely gone. So yeah, they were like, we're gonna fully enforce this rule for any new students, but for you we'll let you off. So.
How did you feel about that though? And like being the only black kid in the school.
Yeah, that was a weird one. It's funny because I didn't really become fully aware of it till I went to uni.
Oh really?
I think it was around about a time people were getting more sort of socially aware about or sort of people my age, or you were getting more kind of talking more about race issues and that kind of thing. But then also I became very aware of the fact that I act white. which
Okay.
because all of a sudden there were black people all over uni. St Andrews still doesn't have many evidence at St Andrews uni, but there's obviously not many black people at St Andrews.
Yeah.
But there were some, which was a change, and none of them acted like me. So I was like, oh, okay, like I am really different, and I wasn't really fully aware of that until I went to uni. So that was kind of the weirdest thing for me. Is like I grew up with like a white mother, like only my mum's side of the family, they're all white. All my friends were white, or Asian. So like I didn't have black people in my life at all.
That must have been quite a shock.
It was, and I wasn't really sure. When I started uni, I started thinking there was a way that black people were supposed to act, and stereotypically there is to some extent, but that's obviously bullshit. And it wasn't until I kind of got more confident in myself that I realised that it didn't really matter that I was an Oreo or whatever you might want to call
an Oreo.
Yeah, I get called an Oreo all the time. Yeah. You're black on the outside and white on the inside. So
I've never heard of that before. I don't know whether I should be laughing at that or not.
I think it's probably quite politically incorrect.
Yeah, literally.
I was say it. So
yeah, I'm an Oreo. This is gonna take a bit of a turn, but I was gonna ask, what was it like growing up without your dad then? So that must have obviously really impacted you feeling like you were white.
Yeah. So my dad was never a part of my life.
Really?
I did see him once or twice a year, maybe. My mum wanted him to be a part of my life, and she wanted me to have a father figure around. But my mum and dad like broke up when she was pregnant with me. So
oh really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I never had like a father figure around. So yeah, I don't know. It was probably tough, but I didn't realize it was tough because I didn't know any different really. So as I say, yeah, like I was just, all I knew was me and my mum, and all I knew was life in Scotland and a little bit in England, and I knew the sort of white people I had around me, but my racial identity didn't really become a big part of my life until I grew older and became more aware, and the people around me were more diverse.
And how do you feel about it now?
Now I'm incredibly proud to be black. Yeah. Like of course it's a huge part of my life. And I have black friends. Yes. But I don't feel like I have to act differently around them, which I used to when I was in like first year at uni and stuff like that. I'd be going up to like the black guys being like, yo man, what's up man, and stuff. And looking back, I'm like, what was I doing? Like,
well, you didn't know any different.
I didn't know any different. I was like, oh, I'm supposed to act, because people would say like, oh, you don't act black enough, so I would try and act more like them. But now I'm just like totally myself, and I've got like a diverse friend group. And the other thing is, I think particularly after the sort of BLM movement, my white friends are a lot more aware of my race as well, and are more open about talking about it and how it affects me, and conversations about times in the past where we would, like, I don't know, maybe like racist jokes were made and these sort of things that seemed okay when we were younger, because I didn't know any better than to stand up for myself.
And also you were the only one. Like it must have been so odd coming out of that situation being like, oh, actually that was really wrong.
Yeah. And I didn't really realise it was wrong until I was older. And to be fair, I've seen other friends, of other races also sort of come to that realisation as they get older. And I think it's not just about being the only black guy. It's also partly just that I think society and also just our generation is actually just getting more aware and more open about these about these kind of things, and
social media as well. Like,
it's like, it means so much to me, because like this is maybe like kind of a controversial viewpoint, but so like when you go to Black Lives Matters marches and these kind of things, and of course I find it incredibly empowering to see black speakers and black voices like lifted up and raised, but at its core racism is a white people's problem, and so I find it so much more touching and so much more empowering when I see white people speak up. So it's been huge for me seeing my white friends be more vocal and more kind of just more aware of that of you know, these sort of struggles in society, and so I don't feel like the weight is on my shoulders to educate people, you know.
No, I completely agree. So how was your family? Because you said that you were surrounded by your mum's family.
Yeah, I don't really talk about race with my family, weirdly. Without going into too much detail about individuals and stuff like that, I think there were some members of my family, particularly like older I've got into it. My granny wasn't particularly a huge fan of the fact that my mum was with a black guy. Apparently,
Eyeless guy, small island mentality.
Everybody's granny's like that. Like everybody's granny's a little bit racist, and is that not true? It's a generational thing, right?
I don't think I never met my dad's mum, but my French gran, she lived in Algeria. So I'm not too sure.
Okay, fair.
But I don't know, French people are very racist, so it also wouldn't surprise me at all. But she lived in Algeria and Morocco, so maybe.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to speak. I don't speak. She's got
Well,
dementia. I don't know.
I think it's particularly when people come from a kind of small town background and are not a very diverse background, and they haven't travelled much. It's easy. I think racism is the wrong word. It's more of like an ignorance or kind of like being scared of the unknown.
100%.
And I never, I've had lots of comments from older people about my race that would be seen as being a little bit untoward or whatever. But I never take that personally, because I generally see it as, well, they grew up in a different time, and I joke around and I'm like, oh, like my granny's racist. My granny's not racist. My granny just didn't know any better back then, and then exposure to different races and kind of positive interactions with people from different backgrounds causes you to learn that whatever preconception you had isn't necessarily correct. And that happened with my granny, and she's been a fantastic grandmother to me, and she was like the few times she met my dad, she was always lovely to him as well. It was never an issue once it was obvious that race was going to be a big part of like our lives as a family.
Of course. Is she still alive now?
She is still alive. Yeah, she lives in up in the Isle of Skye still.
Aww,
so yeah, I go up there for Christmas and stuff.
So are you very close with them, especially now?
Yeah. My granny, I'm very close. My mum was very close to her, and my mum always had a difficult relationship with my entire family.
I remember reading on your Facebook post, like when you shared it on your Instagram, that she was one of 6.
Yeah, so she had 5 brothers.
Yeah, the only girl.
Yeah. So I think it was a very male-dominated household, and I also, we talk about kind of the Highlands being not exposed to the rest of the world in terms of racial diversity, but also just in terms of things like mental illness. It was really something that's wasn't spoken about up there, and still isn't really that much. And my mum struggled a lot with her mental illness for a lot of her life, and I think my family, as did everybody, and as did that myself, found it quite difficult to find the best way of dealing with her.
Of course, but you're also her kid, you know?
Yeah.
You were just a child. And I remember reading that before you came up to Edinburgh, you were put into care in London. Was that right?
Yeah.
So from a really young age, it's just been like, you've had it really, really tough. And like, I remember reading your post. I remember messaging you about it, and I was absolutely like blown away by like the amount of strength that you have to push through all of that. That's so difficult, and especially like when you were just raised by your mum, and like it's clear that you loved her so much as well. It's really, really hard.
No, I appreciate that, and I don't know. I've always been the kind of person that I don't like to feel sorry for myself, and I don't like to. I mean, growing up, I didn't speak about my mum's issues at all.
And it was like from the day you were born, wasn't
it? Yeah. So it was always a part of my life. It maybe got more frequent as I got older. That might not be true. That might actually just be that I remember it more because, you know, when I was a kid, I wasn't really aware of it. But yeah, I was very secretive about my mum's life. So partly I was being protective, but partly, you know, I didn't know whether other people would understand, you know, like her illness.
But how could you? You were just a kid, and also, like, people are only now starting to like talk about mental health properly and like you know, really open up about it. Back then, people would have had no idea. Well, they probably would have been like, she's on her period or something stupid.
Exactly,
you know?
But also the thing is that yes, we are getting better as a society about talking about mental health issues, but I think there still hasn't really been much of a discussion about like serious mental illness, you know, and that's something that I feel quite strongly about is that and I include myself in this to some extent, you know, we kind of pat ourselves on the back a bit, like, oh, like it's great that we talk about mental health, and, you know, having like days to focus on yourself and these kind of things, and, you know, but I get very frustrated when World Mental Health Day comes around and people post, you know, a lot of the same kind of stuff about, you know, taking care of your mental health and stuff, but like nobody, if people met my mum or somebody else who was, you know, maybe in hospital at the same time as her when she was unwell, they would be like probably scared, you know, like severe mental illness is so different from like having a bad mental health day that I think we're nowhere near ready as a society to have a discussion about that kind of thing. And that's something that I want to try and do as much as I possibly can, is to kind of raise awareness of things like, you know, psychosis, which was the sort of main symptom that my mum had as part of her illness, which causes, you know, delusions and like really terrifying things that the majority of people, unless you've known somebody who like deals with those specific things, you're not going to know anything about it, and it would scare you to you know, not you personally, but like it would scare people to meet somebody who was suffering from things like that, because they can come out with some scary things. And so I'm more open about it now, but back then I didn't like to tell people about her illness at all.
You also probably wouldn't know how people would react.
I didn't know how people would react. No, not at all. I didn't, you know, all the way through school I didn't invite pals round to my like home or anything like that. I would always go over to theirs, and I'm kind of ashamed of that now, because there was maybe an element of yes, although I was partly trying to protect my mum, there was also an element of maybe being an embarrassed teenager, and you know, feeling like, well, why is my life not the same as everybody else's, you know, especially when you're at like a private school, and I felt like everybody had, you know, this like really successful nuclear family at home and was, you know, living these happy middle class lives. I know now that everyone's got their own problems, and that wasn't true, but the way I saw it back then, we came from like a working class background. I already felt like a bit of an outsider being at Harriet's. And yeah, I just thought this is just another like notch on my like Chris's family's, you know, like doesn't fit in. And yeah, I just tried to hide it all away.
I don't think that's anything that you should be ashamed of, because it's what you needed to do, like, to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And you were a teenager. Like, how were you supposed to know differently? Do you know what I mean? It's so interesting what you say about the private school thing and like thinking everyone has this perfect family, because I literally felt like that too. Like so much. Like my parents were like going through like a bad separation, then my dad got cancer, and like I just felt like everyone had this perfect little shitty life, and I hated everyone, and I was such an angry kid.
Quite resentful, right?
I resented everyone. I was like, when they were getting like BMWs and Range Rovers for their birthday, I was going to visit my dad in hospital. Do you know what I mean? Like, I hated everyone because I just didn't understand how I couldn't have and also for me, like, I also couldn't understand how that was their normal life, was getting stuff like that. Like, who gets a BMW at 17 or a Range Rover? Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, that's mental.
And then, like, I just had all this, like, baggage going on. I was extremely depressed and I, like, hated my life. And I had all this, like, I was seeing this all the time. I was seeing this every day. And it was just so brutal. So I can, like, nowhere near on your level. But I completely understand what you mean about this nuclear family and just not understanding what was going on. Like,
yeah, but I don't know if you've found the more, I guess maybe the older and more aware you get, the more you realise that everybody kind of feels a bit like that. Almost everybody thinks that they're the one that doesn't fit in, or thinks that they've got it really bad and everybody else's life is
teenagers
perfect.
As a teenager, so selfish.
You
I was
know?
like, I have the worst life in the world. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like when you grow up, you're like, everyone's going through so much. Like everyone was.
Yeah. Right.
But they were, I don't know, maybe better at hiding it. Because like I just assumed everyone had such a cushy life, and I was just, going downwards. You know.
Well, that's the thing is that I was one of those ones that was really good at hiding it, and I, I didn't, almost to the extent that I didn't allow myself to even think that I had troubles at home. I think growing up I switched off to a lot of my life, really, to be honest, and like my memory, this is something that I'm trying to like fix now. My memory is really poor of that period of my life, and that's just like a coping mechanism.
Yeah, your brain's
really,
just trying to like protect itself, which is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like there's so much that I don't remember either of like my childhood.
Yeah.
And like when people ask like, oh, when did this happen? I was like, couldn't tell you.
It really sucks.
It's so annoying because I'm like, I feel like I've got no memories. Do you know what I mean? It's really, really weird. When did it, like, what's the earliest memory you have then?
My earliest memory, that's a tough one. I don't know if it's possible to have memories when you're 1 year old, but I feel like I remember my first birthday, because I got like this, it's like a little box with 4 like shapes or something. Each shape you had to twist it or push it or something, and then a wee farm animal would pop up. And I remember thinking this was like the coolest thing ever. I just kind of crawled over to it. My mum was doing a wee party for me or something like that, and there were a few cousins and whatever over in the corner. I just remember crawling over and thinking, I don't need to deal with anyone else's shit. I'm playing with this.
That's quite
I've
a
got a
nice
flash
first
memory of
memory.
that, and I've asked my mum about it, and she said that was true. So like, that's a memory, and it's nice for me to have a memory from that period. It's just flashes, obviously, but
And when did it start to go? Like, when did you start to realize that there was something that, like, not wrong, but like you kind of started to realize that your mum wasn't well?
In primary school, my mum was. I think my mum got very unwell when I was in primary school, and I wasn't old enough to be able to help her, and or fully understand what was wrong, and I understood. I could see that she was acting at times, would act out and act really weird and act crazy, and like sometimes she came into school and like embarrassed me. Like once she took me out of school because she got like fears that I was being hurt at school, or and this is what like psychosis is. It's kind of like these they call it like sort of persecutory delusions, and it's like you feel like you're being persecuted, you feel like the world is against you, you feel like and it's weird that it seems to present, as far as I've read and understand, it presents almost identically in everybody, pretty much everybody that suffers from psychosis. It always seems to be this sort of idea that maybe the government is working against you, or that all the people in your life want you dead, or the people that you love dead, or things like that, which I think when it must be terrifying. And if that's truly, if you just imagine you're sitting there and you truly believe that everybody in the world wants you to die, it must be terrifying. So I think there were some cases when I was younger when she felt that people maybe wanted to harm me, and I remember once she rocked up at school and was like, "I'm taking you out," and just grabbed my arm and walked out. And I was 8, And I was so embarrassed. Like, so embarrassed. I was like, Mum, what are you doing? Like, go away. I'm at school. I'm with my pals. I've been spending my entire time, like, putting on a brave face. I always, like, growing up, I put on this, like, big smile and pretended like nothing was happening. My pals had no idea.
Did the school know that there was, like, issues at home?
Honestly, I don't know. They certainly knew that day.
They must have been,
they didn't know before. They found out that day because, like, she was like, you are out of here, and, like, took me home. And to be honest, I don't remember a single thing about she kept me off school for about 3 weeks, I think. Like, at that period, basically until she got better, I was kept off school
because she was so worried someone was going to harm you.
Yeah. And obviously around about that point, I started realizing that there's something you didn't really fully understand because I was only 8 or 9, maybe younger, but I knew there was something seriously up. But at that age, you don't think of those things. The main thing I thought about was how embarrassing it was.
And how you want to be with
what was
friends.
Even worse was, like, the first day I went back. Your mum makes a big scene, like, taking you out of school, and then 3 weeks later, I've just got, like, turn up as if nothing happened, like, hi guys. That was mortifying as, like, an 8-year-old kid. You're just, like, so embarrassed, and other 8-year-old kids don't really know what's going on, so they ask you all about it. They, like, make jokes about it and stuff. And
what did you do in the 3 weeks off, or do you not remember?
I have no recollection whatsoever. I think that was probably, I don't know. I the only thing I can imagine is that when I went back to school, my mum must have gone into hospitals, and then, like, my grandparents or social services would have been like, right, we're putting you back into school, because I don't really remember. I don't know. I wish I remembered more of that kind of stuff.
She was in and out of hospital most of your life.
Yeah.
So who would look after you when she was in hospital?
It varied. It would be one of my uncles, or my grandparents would come down from the sky.
But you stayed in your home, so you were never taken away from your home?
Occasionally I was. So I had uncles that lived in Glasgow and uncles that lived in Edinburgh, and I would occasionally go and live with them.
But never back into care?
No. Okay. So the only time I was ever in care, my mum actually put me into care, like, herself. So again, this was when she had, these delusions and thought, so she actually started believing that she was being the one that was harming me, because she was worried about her illness being the reason that she thought I was only, like, 2 years old or something like that. And I think she thought that being as unwell as she was, that it was going to bring me to harm or make me grow up to be a bad person or whatever. So she put me into care while she tried to get better and whatever. And I've got small memories of living with foster family. I don't know how long I was with them. I think it was maybe a few months. But, like, I hated it. The main memory I've got is the day that my mum turned up to pick me up again.
You must have been so relieved.
Yeah, it was. And I found out when I was older that my mum had actually tried to kill herself while I was in care. I didn't know that for, like, another 15 years or something. But it just makes me aware that she was severely unwell even at that time, and I just didn't really know.
Do you think that she just kept trying to protect you throughout all of it? Because the fact that she put you, like, she was like, I'm going to harm him.
Yeah.
I need to put him into care. Like, from everything, like, I read, it just seemed like she was just constantly trying to, like, protect you at all costs. Yeah,
that was her only goal, really, in life. It was like, make me happy, get me, bring me up as well as she possibly can. I don't think it's any coincidence that when I grew up and moved out of home and became an adult and sort of moved away from her was when she, finally succeeded in taking her life, because in a way her job was done. And I think that was probably the way she looked at it, was she only had one purpose of living for my entire life, and that was to serve for me. And I guess that's kind of what every parent, that's kind of the meaning of parenthood. When you have a child, is your life, a big part of your life ends, and you begin living your life for somebody else. But
do you think she was a good parent?
Yeah. In terms of, I know that she didn't think she was a good parent, but in terms of what a parent is for. Like what the aim of a parent is to, protect a child, to educate a child, and to give them a happy and fulfilling upbringing. And yeah, I had those things. I was happy, maybe because I didn't allow myself to really think when I was growing up about what was going on around me. But for all I cared, it was just me and her against the world, and I was happy. And she taught me so much about life. She would spent a lot of time kind of just educating me outside of school. She took me out of school and stuff like that at that one time. She after school she would like any parent, she was teaching me, she was doing extra work with me. And like I like to think that I've grown up to be a pretty decent
of
man.
Course.
And so yeah, like I think she was a good parent.
Was there mental health issues in her whole family? Like, was it a genetic thing, or where did this stem from?
I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest. I think maybe she had an auntie or a cousin or something who had a similar illness. It was something I wanted to look into a bit after she passed, but haven't really managed to properly get into it.
It's quite hard to look into that though, to see if there was something that happened, or there's a genetic thing. That's really getting into it and opening up stuff that you might not want to know. You know?
It's a tough one, and I know that one of my uncles did want to properly look into it. The first thing he asked me for after she passed was some strands of her hair, so he could go and because he's a top doctor in the US, and he was like, oh, can I go and do some DNA testing or whatever. I haven't actually sent them to him yet, but I think at the time I was like, I've got bigger problems to deal with than sending you my dead mum's hair. But
so fair. Yeah, literally, mate. Can we just take a wee minute?
Yeah.
Thanks.
But yeah, I think there are probably some genetic factors, but I think a lot of it is to do with a combination of whatever genetic predisposition you've got and traumas in your life, various traumas that might lead you to kind of basically go off the rails.
So none of her siblings had any of this?
No. A few of her siblings have dealt with sort of milder mental illness issues, but nothing is severe. No.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you said about how it seems like the world's not ready to actually realise how bad mental health is.
Yeah.
I never thought of it like that before, and I am one of those people that just doesn't actually realise to the extent of how bad it can be.
Yeah.
Because psychosis is something that no one will ever be able to understand, but it sounds absolutely terrifying. And as a kid, you were having to watch your mum go through that. How was it seeing her go through these episodes when you were young, and how did you deal with it?
When I was young, even when I grew up, it's a weird one. When I say that we need to increase awareness about it, I've lived for 26 years with at close quarters with somebody who suffers from extreme psychosis, and I still didn't really understand it. It's something that is purely within somebody's mind, and that's what makes it so difficult to kind of raise awareness about it. Because if somebody like me who cared for somebody, was a carer for somebody who suffered from this, didn't really get it, and I didn't know how best to help her. I didn't know what the right things to say were. I tried so many different ways of trying to help her get better, but if I couldn't figure it out, I don't know how somebody who's never even seen it or
yeah, of course,
in a weird way, I think without ever actually experiencing it for yourself, personally, I don't know how anybody can ever really fully understand it. And so as a young person growing up, I just knew that something was up. I didn't really know why. Yeah.
Do you think that the system failed her?
Yeah, definitely. In many ways, I think mental health system generally is really underfunded. I think people are becoming very aware of that now. My mum, the period just before she passed, there was a period of like 5 months where she was severely unwell, the longest period she was ever unwell. So my mum was quite lucky in the sense that when she was well, she was very well. She was able to be like, you know, basically like a regular member of society. You wouldn't notice from looking at her, speaking to her, that she had these other issues. It was only when, you know, when she had an episode, which would maybe once a year for about a month or 3 weeks or something, that would be when, you know, she suddenly like really changed as a person.
It's for some people it's just constant.
Some people it's constant, and you know, it's funny like being around this area without like revealing too much like where we are, but we're close to the hospital where my mum passed.
And, yeah, of course.
And yeah, it's you can see people when you walk around the streets here.
I'm so sorry, like, I didn't even think.
No, it's all right. I've not been back here much really. The only times I've been back are on the anniversary of her passing, actually. So kind of weird for me being back here, but like I always noticed growing up, when you walk around these streets, you would see people who are like, you can tell that they've come from the hospital, like, you know, and that again, that's another thing that like, yes, mental illness is invisible and stuff, but in some ways it's very visible because it affects your life if you're like severely ill, it affects your life in so many ways that you stop caring about looking after yourself. You don't take care of your appearance.
And would that happen to your mother during those times where she wasn't well?
A bit, yeah. Like I would be able to tell from looking at her if she was unwell.
But then there was other times where like
other times, no, you wouldn't really know. You know, she was never somebody that really took huge care in her appearance. Like she wasn't like particularly vain or anything, but yeah, I think maybe it was just that by that time we kind of lived a little bit of like maybe like a middle class life, and a lot of people who suffer from these sort of illnesses, unfortunately, because of their illnesses, end up living like very difficult, poor lives where they can't even afford to look after themselves. Yeah, the system definitely failed her, but yeah, I don't know. It's there's just not enough funding. I don't really know how to fix it. Whether it's you know, funneling money from other services.
It's not ours to fix. You know, this is the government's problem.
Yeah.
And people talk about, like, we talk about it a lot. Like, I'm seeing more and more people talk about it on social media about how the mental health like system needs to be fixed. We need to be putting more things in place to like make it actually, like, the waiting list is insane. Like 2 years for therapy.
It's ridiculous.
Like, and this is a bit off track, but I know a girl who was sexually assaulted quite violently, and she went to the NHS and told them, she went to like a mental health clinic, and they were like, it's going to be about 3 years before you can talk to someone about it. 3 years before you can talk to someone about being sexually assaulted.
That's ridiculous.
Like, it, and if you don't have the money, then like you're fucked basically.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky enough that like I can afford to go to therapy, and I have been in therapy since I was like 9. Like, but for other people it's just like, it's not even a thought that they can't even think about going to therapy, because they can't, like, how can you? Because you've got so many other things to worry about. Like, you have to pay your bills, everything's so expensive these days. Like, how can they put money aside to go to therapy too? Like, it's absolutely shocking.
It could, I don't know whether it's just a mental health thing or whether it's an NHS wide issue, to be honest. I mean, so like your dad passed from cancer, was it right? Is that right? And when he first got diagnosed, was it like, were you, in terms of seeing specialists and stuff, was that quite difficult
for him to see people? My mum was thinking about going private,
really,
purely because she was like, this is ridiculous.
Well, there you
but
go.
they said to her, so he was at the Beatson in Glasgow, which is like a cancer hospital, but they said to her that he was the best, like the guy that specialised in melanoma was the best like doctor in the country, like actually in the whole of the UK, so they were best to just like wait on and stuff. But I remember, like, it was, my dad was quite lucky because, I mean, he wasn't lucky, but like, because his cancer was quite severe, he got seen to more quickly than other people.
I see.
But I remember him telling me about people that were having to wait ages for appointments for cancer. Like, it's just, I don't understand how this can be.
Anything where there's such a high death rate, like people need to be seen immediately.
Immediately.
I don't know. It is terrible.
There's nothing we can say. It feels like it's just a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, I was reading the other day a study about people who suffer from the similar illness to what my mum had. So basically, like depression, major depression, and psychotic symptoms. And I think it was like 60% of people who suffer from those symptoms have suicidal ideation, and about 15% attempt suicide. So, anything that has a potential death rate as high as that, you can't just leave it up to chance.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be waiting, as I say, like the time before my mum passed.
Yeah.
She waited 5 months just to be seen by a doctor.
That is absolutely fucking insane.
Like,
and I remember reading in your post that the day before she was supposed to go to her appointment, she was informed that the man had left his job post.
Yeah, it wasn't even, I think it was the day of actually. She turned up to her appointment with her psychiatrist. So the first thing that happened was she turned up for her appointment with her psychiatrist and got told, oh, you're not a patient in this district anymore. And she was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, we've redrawn the lines for, We've
redrawn the lines?
Yeah,
what do you mean?
So you're now in a different district. We're going to have to reassign you a different psychiatrist. And she hadn't had a letter or anything to tell her this. That is
shocking.
So she just rocked up and they were like, I'm sorry, you'll get another letter in the post telling you when your new appointment is. So then she waited like another 2, she'd already waited I think 3 months for that appointment. Then she waited another 2 months with this new district, new psychiatrist. Turned up on the day, got told he actually just left his job and we don't have anybody else who can see you, so you're going to have to wait again. So she never actually got to see a psychiatrist. It progressively over those 5 months got more and more unwell, ended up in hospital and took her own life when she was in hospital. So yeah,
that is absolutely I can't even wrap my head around that.
It's so bad. And
this was all in the NHS?
Yeah, it's all in the NHS. Yeah. There just isn't, there just aren't the numbers there, I don't know whether we don't have enough doctors. I don't know whether we don't have enough people specialising in psychiatry. Mm-hmm. I'm not really sure what the problem is, but there's a problem somewhere. It's not our
problem to solve. Again, this is not something you should be solving, to help your own mum,
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not a psychiatrist.
That's true.
You need someone to I think it's just insane. Could you, if you don't mind talking about it, could you talk a bit about, I remember reading about your mum and the medication and the lead up and then the day of and everything, and they were denying her the medication she usually had?
Yeah, so I mean, I won't go into too much detail about the medication stuff because it's all very technical, but essentially, so my mum was diagnosed with an illness called schizoaffective disorder. It's a little bit like schizophrenia, which people have kind of heard of, and
there's such a stigma around it.
I don't think people don't really fully understand. People assume it's like split personalities and hearing voices and stuff.
They assume that they're
which I think is the case for some people.
Yeah.
My mum never heard voices, but she would occasionally, as I say, have these sort of delusions where she thought that the world was against her and whatever. So schizoaffective is similar to schizophrenia in the sense that you still have these psychotic symptoms, but the difference is it's more closely attached to a mood disorder, so essentially depression. So for her, essentially, it would be brought on if she was in a bad place in her life or if she was depressed. My mum suffered from depression as well, and then when she got depressed she would get psychotic, and that was when the psychosis appeared, whereas schizophrenia is a little bit more all-encompasses your life. But yeah, so she was in hospital this time back in 2020, and she, for some reason, I don't know why, they decided they were going to try her out on a new medication, a new antipsychotic medication, and they decided that in order to fully determine the effects of this new medication, they were going to take her off antidepressants. And as I say, her diagnosis is a mood disorder. Depression is what brings on her psychosis. She needs antidepressants, otherwise she's going to get more unwell. So, long story short, like this illness, this medication just didn't work. The new one, they were trying it out, didn't work. She got more and more unwell over her time in the hospital. I spoke to her psychiatrist. I was in visiting her like every day, maybe a couple times a day. I was speaking to the psychiatrist. I was saying, look, this isn't working. She always gets better when she's in hospital, when she's, on a, a care plan and medication plan. Something's not right. And she's expressing like a lot of suicidal thoughts. And the psychiatrist was like, look, she's going to say these sort of things to you, but she's not suicidal. Like, trust me, like she'll be fine.
You know your mum.
I know. I know her really well. And I was like, I'm telling you, like, she is in a bad way. She doesn't ever react to medication like this. She is getting worse, and she is going to kill herself in here. And
how did that feel to be just disregarded like that?
I was used to it,
That's so insane.
Unfortunately, for many people who are in the Royal Edinburgh or psychiatric hospitals, my mum was lucky that she had me visiting her every day, if not twice a day. A lot of people don't really have anybody visiting them at all. As I say, a lot of these people come from pretty bad backgrounds. A lot of their families aren't very supportive. Maybe the ones that are supportive don't really understand how best to help. Like, I studied psychology at uni and stuff like that, so I had a little bit of an idea. And but so I think the doctors are used to just dismissing people. They weren't used to having somebody come in and say, look, I think I know best in this situation. Obviously, you're not supposed to tell a doctor how to treat a patient, but when you can see that what they're doing is making them worse, and you know the person, it's not like treating a broken leg. Treating somebody's mental illness is quite personal to that individual. And I think there should be a little bit more interaction with the person and their family.
Completely.
In terms of like trying to find a suitable care plan. Anyway, she denied that she was suicidal. She was like, look, leave it with me. And then after like 3 weeks, she wasn't. As I say, she was getting worse. Again, I spoke to a psychiatrist, and she said, I don't really know why it's not working, so I'm going to phone the pharmacist and ask and see what they say. And I'm like, why are you phoning the pharmacist? Why are you like administering a medication you don't even know how? If you don't even know how it works, and you can't, if you're not able to explain why this isn't working, then you shouldn't be in charge. Yeah, literally, why do you have this job? What's wrong with you? Anyway, didn't work. They didn't give her antidepressants. She got more and more depressed, started talking about suicide all the time. And long story short, on it was the 17th of March 2020, I went to visit her in the morning, and she had like made a noose essentially, and like obviously like trigger warnings and stuff, because this is quite, I guess, quite explicit, but she'd made like a noose, which is showing a severe intent to harm herself, in her room. And I got her to hand it into the staff, so the nurse who was in charge. And I went and chatted to the nurse. I was like, she's just handed in a noose. You need to, like, the protocol is that they would put her on basically like a 24/7 watch, because this has happened before. Not when she hasn't. I've never seen her like make a noose or anything like that before, but it's happened before where she's been like clearly speaking about wanting to kill herself. And so in another hospital over in the west of Scotland, they put like 2 nurses in her room at all times, and she wasn't ever allowed to be on her own. I expected them to do that, and at the very least, the one thing that every patient has to do is they're not allowed anything. They're not allowed phone cables. They're not allowed like any sort of wires. They're not allowed like scarves. I think she'd made this out of like the rope from her dressing gown or something. They're not allowed anything like that. So I said to him, like, she shouldn't have even had this in the first place. Can you make sure that her room gets cleared? And long story short, the nurse, 1, didn't clear her room, 2, didn't tell. So he finished his shift. I saw him. I was still on the visit. Then I saw him finishing his shift. He left. I've since found out, because there's been an inquiry, like a beginning of an inquiry into it, that he went into the staff room, dumped the noose on the table, and walked off to finish his shift. And
what the fuck?
And didn't even tell anybody like that he was passing over to for the night shift. Oh, by the way, like Sarah is suicidal. Sarah's made a noose, whatever. I went to visit her again in the evening, and she I could tell that she was in a really bad way, and something just felt different that day. She would always kind of promise me that she was going to be there the next day, and that she would see me the next day, and she didn't promise that day, and it just felt off. I didn't really know why, but then I always thought she was safe in the hospital, so I left, and within 15 minutes after I left that evening, they hadn't taken the scarf out of her room, and she hung herself. So it's a tragic story, really, and it's just the fact that it was so preventable is really frustrating.
I'm so sorry. That is actually horrible, and no one should have to experience that after asking someone, please make sure that my mum's okay, please search her room, and they just didn't. They just completely disregarded it. Like, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
So you said about opening an inquiry.
Yeah. So it's kind of strange to speak about a suicide in the sense that it could have been somebody else's fault, or that it could have been prevented, because generally with that kind of death, it's an individual choice, and it's very the way that I would have normally, I imagine I would have dealt with grieving about that sort of and something like that happening would have been at some point understanding that was my mum's choice, and that she would have made that choice no matter what. And that's generally kind of what they kind of tell you and teach you to think about in the aftermath of a suicide. But in my mum's case, I know that if she'd been well, she was never suicidal when she was well. This was a direct result of her illness, and her being that unwell was a direct result of the medical decisions that were made in the hospital, like her psychiatrist medicine choices, but then also her the events that happened on the day meant that she basically gave a very explicit cry for help, and it was ignored.
It completely
ignored,
and by someone who was there and saw it and got told, and you were her son, and you told them, and they just ignored it. Yeah,
the reason you put somebody into a secure psychiatric ward is to prevent them from harming themselves. That is the only goal for it, the only aim of it for it. So there's been times in the past where I've been unable to get my mum into hospital when she's been unwell, because we've not been able to prove the threshold that of her admission that is she is going to harm herself or other people. Is basically the threshold to get.
So what, they just wait for her to attempt suicide or try attack someone?
Yeah. So they basically say, look, has she shown any inkling towards harming other people? No, that was never the case. Has she, they would ask her, are you suicidal? And if she said no, then they'd be like, well, we can't admit you. So the streets are full of people who have severe mental illness but don't at that moment want to kill themselves because they can't get into hospital. There's no place for you in hospital if you don't want to kill yourself. Not on a secure ward anyway.
That's insane.
And so I'm like, if the only intention of this ward is to prevent people from killing themselves, how is somebody
then actually do it?
How has somebody managed it when they're told on the day, like, this person is about to kill themselves? But so there's an inquiry into it. It's something that myself and a couple of my uncles have been like really pushing for, back and forth with the courts in Scotland, and it's coming up. I don't have an exact
Is it getting
date.
anywhere?
It's it got confirmed about a month ago that there was going to be an inquiry, which has been, it's now over 3 years since she passed, and we've only just got confirmation of that. So that's been a big fight just to get them to look into it more. In terms of like hearing my story. So like the police interviewed me like a year and a half after she died, which is when I told this story that I've just told you. And at that point they were like, oh, we should probably look into this. But I'm like, well, why did you not do this at the time? A year and a half later is crazy. But so there is definitely going to be an inquiry into it, and as far as I'm aware, it seems like they're taking it pretty seriously. They're leaving no stone unturned. I've been told there's like 800 pages worth of notes that are going into it. So,
oh wow, okay.
I guess that's why it takes 3 years.
Probably.
Yeah.
What would you like to see happen from this?
The only thing that really can come from it is helping future families, really. I don't want other people to have to go through what I've gone through and what my family's gone through. If this can prevent even just one person from dying in a similar circumstance, then it's done its job. So
do you want justice for your mum?
Yeah it's a tough one, where I've felt every emotion under the sun. I've felt like a lot of resentment. I felt kind of anger towards the NHS in general.
As you would.
As I say, my mum died like 3 days before lockdown, and then every week in
was
lockdown,
that?
everyone was like clapping out their windows for the NHS and stuff, and I was like so upset, and like
I can't even imagine.
In many, like, the NHS is a fantastic thing. I'm not like ungrateful for the fact that we have free healthcare in this country, but it's just, you go through all these different emotions and you look for somebody to blame. The NHS have a sort of a blanket policy in these sort of cases, and where they won't, they'll always sort of fight their corner in terms of like they'll fight their case in the inquiry. They won't really admit liability. So that's been kind of difficult, because it forces you to relive everything. It forces you to like actually push it through an inquiry. You never get like an apology letter from them saying we were at fault here. So that's been kind of tough. But to be honest, I'm kind of glad, because it gives me something to keep fighting for. And I don't know, after she passed, I wrote that Facebook post and everything. I felt like really motivated that I had to do something. And then time goes on and you go through different phases, and I started feeling quite apathetic and quite nihilistic about the world, and helpless, and then you achieve. I wasn't achieving anything, and I started thinking, well, what am I doing to actually fight for her name? And I don't know. It's tough to know the best way in which you can make a change or do something to make sure she didn't die in vain. So I'm just doing what I can, really, and trying my very best, and hopefully something good comes of it. I'm glad I wrote that Facebook post. I think that's helped a lot of people. And
how was it going into lockdown? Because I didn't even think of the whole clapping for the NHS. I would be screaming out my window. That must have been a kick in the teeth.
It was. I don't know.
So what did you do during lockdown? Where did you stay? Did you stay at home?
So my mum was renting a flat in Edinburgh at the time, and her lease had to end because she'd passed. So I wasn't able to live with her. So I had to move in with my ex at the time, and I don't know. Lockdown was a blur. The first 3 or 4 months.
Anything from lockdown.
The first 3 or 4 months, I've my only memory of it is like crying, to be honest, which sounds so pathetic. But like,
was your ex there for you?
Yeah, no, she was a big support, to be fair, and I kind of needed somebody.
You needed someone that was comfort for you.
Yeah, like I need, like, it was almost like a crutch for me. Like I honestly don't think I would have made it through that period if I had to lock down by myself. You know, that would
absolutely not
impossible. So, yeah, but then, yeah, I think, you know, so that was a big help. It was important to have you know, people around. My family, none of them live in Edinburgh, so it was they weren't really around, but they tried to be there when they could. But to be honest, I fell out with my family. They didn't agree with some of the things that I put in my Facebook post, and
okay.
yeah, and they essentially it was like I went through a large period for maybe a year after feeling like I had like no family, like nobody in my corner, especially when I broke up, when my ex and I broke up, and then I had to move out of that flat, and that's when I ended up, well, I lived in a hostel for a few days, and I was just like, what has my life become? Like, here I am, like living in a hostel. At the time I was thinking, I've got no family. I'd kind of cut all my friends out, not intentionally, but
that happens though when you're grieving.
Yeah,
and like you just kind of feel like no one gets it, and you're just like, all of you just fuck off, please.
Well, that's something I wanted to ask you, is that what did you find helpful, or what would you, if somebody else you know's parent passed or something similar happened, what are the right things to say? Because I
don't think there is any right thing to say, because I also think everyone is so individual and everyone's grief is so individual. Like, it's weird because grief is universal, but it's so individual, you know, to people. And I think the only thing that you can really tell someone is like that you're there, and make it clear that you're there, and like make an effort. And like, honestly, I just wanted to be left alone. Like, I didn't want to talk to anyone, but my friends would send me care packages, they would text me, they just tell me, like, not even like a how are you, because that's stupid, but like just say like, I love you, like, I'm here for you. Just make it clear that you're present. But it's so hard to know what to say.
No, yeah, you're right. I think there isn't really a right answer.
I just wanted to isolate myself, to be honest.
That's the way I dealt with it as well.
I didn't want to speak to anyone. Just wanted to be left alone. I wanted to just lie in my bed and just stare at the wall. I didn't want to do anything else.
Just kind of cut myself. I've always been quite an avoidant person. I've never been like great with conflict and that kind of thing. And generally, as I say, you know, I had all these problems going on at home, and then I would just put on a brave face and smile and turn up at school or whatever and pretend like nothing happened. And I kind of reverted into that stage a little bit. Also, you know, having done my Facebook post, you know, it kind of went like viral, so to speak. That. You know, I think it got shared like 15,000 times or something, and so I got maybe like 1,000 or 2,000 messages.
That's very overwhelming,
which
as well. That's a lot.
You know, as lovely as it was having my friends message me, I was like, I'm not using social media anymore.
I'm out. Like, see you later.
See ya. Like, so
I've done my piece. Now I'm leaving.
So, you know, I think it was tough. It was tough having lockdown, because I couldn't. What would have been great would have been just seeing my friends in person. You know, having them as a support network,
and that distraction,
and knowing that I didn't have to like speak to them on Facebook, because I knew that at least twice, maybe like 10 times a day, I was going to get a message from somebody saying, "Oh, thanks so much for putting that post. My mum also died." Or you know,
the offloading,
and you know, offloading their stories, and it meant so much to me that so many people had been touched by my story, but I was not in a place where I was able to like help them or speak about it.
You did not know it was going to go that viral.
No,
you did not know it was going to go that crazy.
No, I thought like a few of my friends would share it. So,
and also in lockdown, how the heck can you stay away from the internet?
Well,
That's all there is.
People had nothing better to do than read my post.
Literally, and offload onto you, and you're like, I really want to help, but I really can't right now.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, it's I can't believe it was literally just before lockdown as well.
Yeah,
you had so much time to sit with it. Like, I was lucky enough that like I didn't have the lockdown. Like, I could go out and about, you know, I could like go on like a really depressing winter walk, like when it was dark at 3. But like,
I mean, nobody's lucky in that situation.
Yeah, no one is. But like, lockdown was fucking shit. I'm so sorry, Chris. I'm so like blown away by your strength, and like you're still got a massive nice smile on your face. Like
it's I don't know. I just try to live my life and try to be happy. I think that's what my mum would have wanted. I'm a lot better at looking at the bigger picture now. You know.
Do you ever resent her? Have you ever resented her?
I resented her a lot when I was alive. When she was alive. We had a difficult relationship. We argued a lot. She developed a drinking problem as well, you know, in her later years, which I did resent her for that, even though I understood why it was her coping mechanism for her illness.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that.
Did you ever resent your dad for not being around? Did you think it would have been easier?
Yeah, I went through periods of feeling that he had kind of left us be. I think maybe I felt more resentment towards the rest of my family. Like,
do you still?
My mum and dad weren't together for very long. I think my family should have been there for her more. It was kind of left to me to look after her from a very young age. It was just me and her, and if she got unwell, I would be the one to look after her. Sometimes my family didn't even know because they didn't check in enough, and that was difficult.
Can I ask, and you can tell me if you want to cut this out,
Sure.
about what you wrote about her dad? We don't have to talk about that.
I don't mind like touching on it very, very briefly. I don't want to go into it because I'm only just now repairing the relationships that I've had with my family. But
I'll just cut it out.
It's fine. You can leave it in. But you know, it was very important for me at the time to share that because this was like my mum's story, and I wanted to share her story that I felt has never been heard, because everything she had said about anything in her life was often dismissed because she had mental illness. And I think that's something that a lot of people who've kind of been tarnished with that label will feel, is that people stop believing them about anything and everything. And all I'll really say about it is that although my family, and I understand why my family will never believe the things that that she said and that I posted about, this was her story, and it was the only chance that I had or she had to let the world know, and that was so important for me to get that out there. And that's
okay. We don't have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Apart from that, are you still in contact with your dad now?
A bit, yeah, yeah.
Is he did he show up a bit more, or no, not really?
No. To be honest,
that must have been really, really, really shit.
I don't know. I don't even resent him that much. I think he's got another family now, and I see a lot of myself in him, and it's not necessarily parts of me that I like, but you know, I say I'm quite an avoidant person. That's what he is like. And I think he's never been very good at dealing with hardships in his life and hardships around him. And he's never very good at committing to people and you know, relationships, and he was a bit of a player, and he just like my mum made good friends with the woman that he cheated on her with. And
sorry?
Yeah, because they bonded over the fact that he had cheated on them both with someone else, and I don't know.
Power.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, so I'm glad that they united over that. So
that's insane.
Yeah.
Do you have a good support system around you now?
Yeah. I'm a lot more careful about the people that I have around me. You know, I think when you spend your entire life kind of living for somebody else, which is what I essentially did. You know, I had an unhealthy relationship with my mum in the sense that it was always around the corner that she might try and take her own life, and so we were kind of too much up in each other's space, checking in on each other a lot. You know, I was for all intents and purposes, I was her carer. And I kind of grew up forgetting that I was important at all. And that wasn't her fault. It was just my way of dealing with it was I just stopped putting my needs forward. But then, yeah, I think as I've, it was the weird, when you ask it like about resenting my mum, the probably the most difficult emotion for me after her death was feeling like my life could start now. And
the relief.
And it was that's a horrible thing to think about.
It is.
And, you know, it's no coincidence that since my mum passed, my career has got so much better. You know, my relationships have got stronger.
Did you feel relief in a way?
No, I didn't.
Because I know I did.
I don't know, really. I think it's a tough one.
It's weird.
What did you feel? What did you feel?
I obviously was devastated, but I felt relieved because I felt like my life was on hold and I was just waiting for my dad to pass. Like I felt like I couldn't breathe, and then I felt like I could finally it's done. And he, like, for me it was like he wasn't in pain anymore.
Yeah.
And obviously everyone experiences it differently. Like, and like the death of my dad's so different from the death of your mum. But I did feel that relief because I felt like this is just like, now I feel a bit more free and like I can finally my life can finally start, because it was always in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I think when you speak about them no longer being in pain, that's definitely something I can relate with.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me.
That was something that there was definitely relief about that.
I just felt they were at peace finally.
So when I try and find positives, and that's what I don't know if everybody does that in these situations, but you try and sort of scramble around to find something positive you can take from it. That was normally the one I would land on, was that she was no longer living this life of pain. In terms of waiting for it to happen, I think there's definitely a difference there, because
of course,
you must have felt so helpless because
I
you knew that your dad was gonna die, and you knew there was nothing you could do to stop that, which we couldn't prevent only imagine.
There's
must
no
have
way.
been horrible.
But yours was.
Whereas for me, I also had this anticipation that I knew that at one point my mum was probably going to attempt to kill herself, and she had attempted another time a few years prior as well, and I knew that there were times when this was going to happen, and I always knew it was a possibility. Like deep down, to be honest, I thought to myself she wasn't going to live until I was 30, or I didn't think that was going to happen, but it was also still preventable. It wasn't 100%, and so I always felt like, well, my life can't start until basically I felt like the ideal situation for me right now is my mum lives to 100, and I never saw her getting better from her illness. So basically the best case scenario I thought was my mum lives to like 100, and we carry on going through this rigmarole of will she, won't she kill herself, let's try and make her better, try and make her life as happy as it possibly can, but it always might happen, and my life will always be secondary to that. That was the best case scenario. I kind of accepted that my life didn't really matter. My role was to keep her alive. And ironically, that was kind of what she saw as her role for me as well at the same time, which is why we had this
for each other.
We had this unhealthy relationship in that way. But yeah, so then when it did actually happen, the feeling I got wasn't relief, simply because my only goal in life was now over. So I actually didn't feel like this initial drive, like, oh, now I can do all this stuff. I felt quite lost. I felt like, what am I supposed to do now? When if all you've done your entire life is try to make sure that somebody else is alive, and then they die, I was like, what am I supposed to do? I didn't have any purpose. And lockdown didn't help, but yeah, I just didn't really know what to do with myself. I didn't know I'd never really spent any time introspectively thinking about my own needs and thinking about what I wanted from my life. And
what do you think your purpose is now?
That's a tough one, really. I think, to be honest, the main thing that drives me is to bring as much kind of love to other people as my mum gave to me. You know, there's something about the feeling of being loved that much by somebody is incredibly fulfilling, and all I can really do is try to provide that to other people, and that's kind of what drives me, really.
That's really nice.
But that was quite nice, actually.
Really
it's true though. But
I've got a tear in my eye. No, Finlay literally said, he was like, I'm going to have to get you tissues because you'll start crying. That was really nice.
I'm quite proud of that. It just came to me, but it's true.
What was your favourite thing about her?
I think she was so strong-minded, like really strong-willed, and that like grated with people sometimes, but I really admired it because it's something that I've never been great at, is always speaking my mind and always standing up for myself and stuff. And she was fantastic at it, and like really open about her illness. She would talk to her friends about it. She would talk to anybody that would listen, really.
That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, exactly. And I admired that so much. And I kind of wish for her sake that I had been more open with it when she was alive. But that's why I'm trying to be as open as I can now about it.
I mean, you're coming on a podcast.
I know. Look at me now.
She would be very, very proud of you
Mom,
now.
listen to me. Look at this. But
that's so nice. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to cry.
No, that's all right.
That was really, really, really nice. And I genuinely think that a lot of people are going to find this inspirational. And I'm going to ask you one last question before I let you go.
Okay.
Is what advice would you give other people that are in a situation like you with a parent that might be mentally ill like this?
I think the main thing is two things, really. First of all, learn as much as you possibly can about the illness that they have, and whether that be, learn about the diagnosis that they've been given, but also don't just take that as a given. Like, speak to your parent about what they, what symptoms they feel. Like, people, I think from my experience of meeting people with mental illness, they like to speak about their symptoms a lot. It's quite cathartic for them to even when they're well, to speak about what it's like when they're unwell, because you kind of want to get that out there. That's something that nobody else would ever understand. So, like, just speak to them, try your very best to understand it from their perspective, because it's a very lonely world being that unwell, when it's an illness that nobody else can see. And I said there were two, didn't I? The other one was going to be to listen to them, but I already said that in the first one. So the first, just listen to people, just like,
and be kind. Give people a break. Be kind.
Give people space to speak their mind, and you don't always have to agree with somebody. And particularly with mental illness, somebody might say stuff to you that is very abnormal or very hard to relate to or quite rude. And just try to understand them. So if it is your parent, don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed, speak to them about it. And if your parent's comfortable with it, speak to your friends about it, because you're going to need a support network as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Chris.
It's all right. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry I rambled on for so long.
No, you were great. You just kept talking. I loved it.
More like a TED Talk than a conversation. So I do apologise.
You should do a TED Talk. You would be fantastic on a TED Talk.
Oh, that was so bad.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go and give you a cuddle.
Oh, dear.